I used to believe that destiny knocked politely before changing your life. But the truth is that it sometimes walks through the wrong door and smiles as if it belonged there all along. Rain shimmered across the streets of Manhattan, turning every traffic light into a ribbon of gold and crimson reflected on the wet pavement. My aging delivery van rattled softly as I pulled beneath the covered entrance of the Grand Astoria Hotel. The windshield wipers made one final sweep before stopping, leaving tiny beads of water clinging to the glass. I checked the invoice one last time. One custom floral arrangement. White orchids, ivory roses, olive branches woven into a perfect circle around a velvet ring pillow. Total value, nearly $12,000. More money than my little flower shop usually earned in several weeks. I tightened my cream cardigan over my floral dress and carefully lifted the arrangement from the back of the van. At 26, I had become very good at carrying beautiful things through difficult days. Business had been slow since the beginning of the year. Rent was due in less than a week. My refrigerator held more hope than groceries. Even so, flowers had always reminded me that something fragile could still survive if someone cared enough to keep it alive. The hotel lobby sparkled beneath towering crystal chandeliers. Marble floors reflected the warm light so perfectly that every step felt as though I were walking across polished glass. Before I even reached the reception desk, a young woman wearing a black headset hurried toward me. She looked relieved the moment she saw the arrangement in my hands. "Finally," she whispered. "They are waiting. Please follow me." I barely had time to explain that I was still early before she guided me through a pair of enormous gold doors. Music floated gently through the ballroom. A string quartet played near a sweeping staircase wrapped in thousands of fresh white flowers. Hundreds of elegantly dressed guests filled the room, their conversations blending into a soft hum beneath the music. Everything looked larger than life. Diamonds reflected beneath candlelight. Champagne sparkled inside crystal glasses. Every suit looked custom-tailored. Every smile looked rehearsed. I quietly reminded myself that I was only there to deliver flowers. Nothing more. "Stand here," the coordinator said, pointing toward the center of the grand staircase. "Do not move until he arrives." Before I could ask who she meant, she disappeared into the crowd. I shifted the arrangement slightly to ease the weight on my arms and waited. The room slowly became quieter. One by one, conversations faded. Even the musicians lowered their instruments. Then he appeared. Damien Moretti descended the staircase with calm confidence that seemed impossible to imitate. His black Italian suit fit perfectly against his broad frame. Dark tattoos climbed above the collar of his white shirt before disappearing beneath expensive fabric, hinting at intricate artwork that continued from his neck all the way down his body. His expression remained composed, neither cold nor warm, simply controlled. Guests instinctively stepped aside as he approached. Nobody needed to announce his arrival. The room had already done that through silence alone. I lowered my eyes toward the velvet pillow resting among the orchids, assuming he would simply collect the family ring before greeting whoever he intended to marry. Instead, Damien stopped directly in front of me. Without hesitation, he lifted the platinum ring from the pillow. My heartbeat echoed inside my ears. Cameras flashed from every corner of the ballroom. Before I understood what was happening, he gently reached for my left hand. His touch was steady, respectful, completely certain. The diamond slid onto my finger as effortlessly as though it had always belonged there. A wave of astonished gasps swept across the ballroom. Somewhere behind me, someone accidentally dropped a champagne glass onto the carpet. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. I stared at the ring sparkling beneath the chandelier lights, then slowly lifted my eyes to meet his. He looked just as surprised as everyone else, though only the smallest change in his gray eyes revealed it. I carefully removed the ring from my finger, placed it back onto the velvet pillow between us, and offered a polite smile despite the hundreds of eyes fixed upon me. "Mr. Moretti," I said softly enough that the silence carried every word across the ballroom. "I think you have mistaken me for someone else. I am only the florist." No one breathed. The silence spreading across the ballroom felt heavier than the rain that still tapped gently against the towering windows overlooking Manhattan. I kept my hand steady, even though my heart was racing faster than it ever had before. The platinum ring rested quietly on the velvet pillow between us, catching the warm glow of the crystal chandeliers as though nothing unusual had happened. Around me, Hundreds of elegantly dressed guests stared without blinking, waiting for someone to explain what they had just witnessed. Damien Moretti did not look embarrassed. He did not look angry. Instead, his calm gray eyes remained fixed on mine with quiet concentration, as though he were searching for an answer hidden somewhere behind my expression. It was unsettling because I had expected authority. I had expected frustration. I had not expected curiosity. Finally, he spoke. "Your name." His voice was calm, deep, and measured enough that every person in the room heard it clearly without him raising it even once. I swallowed before answering. "Olivia Carter." He repeated my name slowly, almost thoughtfully. "Olivia Carter." The way he said it made it sound familiar, even though I had never met him before that evening. I smiled politely and nodded toward the floral arrangement. "I own Carter Florals in Brooklyn. I was hired to deliver the flowers. Nothing more." A quiet murmur rolled through the ballroom. Several guests exchanged confused glances while photographers lowered their cameras, unsure whether the ceremony had ended or simply changed into something nobody had expected. Damien never looked away from me. "Who instructed you to stand here?" he asked. I glanced around the ballroom, searching for the young coordinator with the black headset who had rushed me inside only minutes earlier. She was gone. Every face surrounding us belonged to someone dressed for an elegant celebration, but the woman who had confidently pointed me toward the center staircase had disappeared as though she had never existed. "She was right here," I said quietly. The event coordinator told me to wait exactly where I was standing. Damien shifted his attention toward an older gentleman waiting a respectful distance away. His silver hair and composed posture suggested years of experience handling impossible situations. "Anthony," Damien said calmly. "Who assigned the coordinator?" Anthony frowned almost immediately. "I will verify that now, sir." He stepped aside while speaking softly into a wireless earpiece. Despite the unexpected interruption, there was no panic in his voice. Everything about the people surrounding Damien suggested careful discipline rather than chaos. I slowly lowered the floral arrangement onto a nearby table and folded my hands together, hoping to stop them from trembling. "Mr. Moretti," I said gently, "I think it would be best if I left. I have another delivery scheduled tomorrow morning, and I am certain your guests would rather continue their evening without a florist standing in the middle of it." A faint smile almost reached the corner of his mouth. "Almost. Most people," he replied, "would have walked away wearing the ring." I laughed softly despite myself. Most people probably have a better jewelry collection than I do. For the first time that evening, a few guests smiled. Even Anthony looked briefly amused before returning his attention to the message arriving through his earpiece. Damien studied me for another quiet moment. The intricate black tattoos rising above the collar of his perfectly tailored white shirt contrasted sharply against his fair skin, disappearing beneath the expensive fabric that hid the rest of the artwork covering his body. His appearance commanded attention, yet there was something unexpectedly restrained about the way he carried himself. "You returned something that many people would never have given back," he said. I shrugged lightly. "If something does not belong to me, keeping it would never make it mine." His eyes narrowed slightly, not with suspicion, but with interest. Before either of us could speak again, Anthony returned. His normally composed expression had changed. "Sir," he said quietly, "we have reviewed the event staff list." Damien waited. Anthony continued. "There is no coordinator matching Miss Carter's description. Every employee assigned to tonight's event has already been identified. No one wearing a black headset was ever scheduled to work this ballroom." I looked from Anthony back to Damien, suddenly aware that the mistake everyone believed had happened only moments earlier might not have been a mistake at all. Sometimes the smallest unanswered question becomes the beginning of the biggest truth. Anthony's words lingered in the air long after he finished speaking. There was no coordinator, no employee with a black headset, no record that anyone had directed me toward the grand staircase. I looked around the ballroom once more, hoping the mysterious woman would suddenly appear from the crowd with a simple explanation that would return the evening to normal. She never did. The orchestra quietly resumed playing, although the elegant melody no longer matched the mood of the room. Guests tried to continue their conversations, but almost every glance drifted back toward Damien and me. I suddenly felt very aware of my cream floral dress, my comfortable shoes, and the tiny scratches on my hands from trimming rose stems earlier that morning. I did not belong among billionaires and family dynasties. I belonged inside my little flower shop arranging bouquets for birthdays and anniversaries. Damien seemed to notice my growing discomfort. "Miss Carter," he said in the same calm voice that had never once risen above a conversation, "would you allow me 10 minutes to understand what happened tonight?" I hesitated. Every sensible instinct told me to leave immediately. Yet another part of me needed answers just as much as he did. 10 minutes, I replied. After that I really have to go home. He inclined his head slightly. That is all I ask. Anthony guided us toward a private gallery overlooking Central Park. The room felt peaceful compared to the crowded ballroom. Warm amber lights reflected across polished walnut floors, and large paintings lined the walls beneath quiet spotlights. Rain continued falling outside, softening the city skyline into shimmering silver shapes. Damien waited until the doors closed before speaking again. "Tell me everything from the moment you arrived." I described my drive from Brooklyn, the delivery instructions, the woman with the headset, and the exact place where she had told me to stand. He listened without interrupting once. When I finished, Anthony opened a tablet connected to the hotel security system. Video footage filled the screen. We watched me enter the lobby carrying the flower arrangement. Seconds later, the mysterious coordinator appeared beside me exactly as I remembered. "There," I said, pointing at the screen. "That is her." Anthony enlarged the image. Her figure became clearer, but something felt strange. The identification badge hanging from her jacket reflected light so brightly that no name could be read. He switched to another camera positioned farther down the hallway. My image continued walking toward the ballroom alone. The coordinator was gone. "Wait," I whispered. She was standing right beside me. Anthony replayed both recordings several times. One camera showed her. The next showed only me. The transition lasted less than 3 seconds. Damien folded his arms thoughtfully, the dark tattoos above his collar contrasting against the crisp white fabric of his shirt. "Show every hallway camera," he instructed. Anthony complied. We watched each angle carefully. I appeared in every recording carrying the orchids. The coordinator appeared in only one. "That cannot happen," I said quietly. Anthony nodded. "Normally it cannot." Damien remained remarkably composed, but I noticed the way his eyes narrowed slightly, as though another piece of a much larger puzzle had quietly fallen into place. Then he looked toward the floral arrangement resting beside the window. His attention settled on the olive branches woven carefully among the white orchids. "Miss Carter," he asked, "why did you choose olive branches for this arrangement?" I blinked in surprise. I did not. The client specifically requested them. Anthony immediately checked the original order confirmation. His expression changed almost instantly. "Sir," he said carefully, "the order. Form requests only white orchids and ivory roses. There is no mention of olive branches anywhere in the instructions." I stared at the olive branches woven through the white orchids, convinced Anthony had overlooked something simple. "That cannot be right," I said quietly. I added them myself before leaving the shop because I thought they completed the arrangement. They looked familiar. The final word escaped before I could stop it. Familiar. I had never questioned why my hands reached for those branches that morning. They had simply felt necessary, as natural as tying a ribbon around a bouquet. Anthony rotated the tablet toward me again. The digital order confirmation was perfectly clear. White orchids, ivory roses, white satin ribbon, nothing else. I frowned. I could have sworn the customer requested them. Damien walked slowly toward the arrangement resting beside the window. The warm gallery lights reflected softly across the polished leaves. He reached out but did not touch them immediately, studying each branch with careful attention. Finally, he smiled very slightly, although there was sadness hidden beneath the expression. "My grandmother never allowed an important family celebration without olive branches," he said quietly. "She believed they represented peace, chosen freely, never forced." I looked at him in surprise. I have never heard that before. Very few people have. His answer settled over the room like another piece of an invisible puzzle. Anthony quietly cleared his throat. "Sir, there is something else." He opened another file on the tablet. "The florist order was placed online 3 weeks ago using a secure account belonging to the Sinclair family." Damien nodded once. "That is correct." Anthony continued. "However, The payment was processed from a completely different account only 9 minutes later. Damien looked up. Whose? Anthony hesitated before answering. The account no longer exists. I blinked. Accounts do not just disappear. Normally they do not, Anthony replied. This one was permanently closed years ago. Damien stepped closer to the screen. Show me the account holder. Anthony enlarged the archived payment record. A faded name appeared beneath the transaction history. Eleanor Brooks. I repeated the name silently. It meant nothing to me, yet something stirred deep inside my memory, too distant to recognize clearly. Damien noticed my expression. Does the name sound familiar? I slowly shook my head. No. It feels familiar, but I cannot explain why. Silence filled the gallery again. Outside, the rain had finally begun to slow, leaving silver droplets clinging to the enormous windows overlooking Central Park. The city lights shimmered beneath the clouds like scattered stars. I suddenly felt exhausted, as though the evening had lasted several days instead of a few hours. Mr. Moretti, I said gently, I appreciate everything you are trying to understand, but I really need to go home. My shop opens early tomorrow morning, and none of these answers seem any closer than they were an hour ago. Damien looked at me for several quiet seconds before giving a respectful nod. You are right. The simplicity of his response surprised me. There was no attempt to persuade me to stay. No command. No pressure. Anthony will have someone escort you to your vehicle. I smiled politely. That is thoughtful, but I parked directly outside. Damien reached into the inside pocket of his tailored jacket and removed a simple white business card. Only his name and a private phone number appeared on the front. He placed it gently beside the flower arrangement. If anything unusual happens, call me immediately. I slipped the card into my cardigan pocket. Hopefully nothing unusual happens. His gray eyes met mine with calm certainty. Tonight already proved that hope and certainty are rarely the same thing. I picked up my arrangement stand, thanked both men for their kindness, and walked toward the gallery door. Just before I reached it, something caught my attention. Hanging on the far wall was an old framed photograph of a sunlit greenhouse filled with blooming white orchids. Without thinking, I stopped. A little girl wearing a white sun hat stood near the center, holding a tiny watering can almost as large as she was. The image was faded, making every face difficult to recognize. Yet as I stared at the photograph, one impossible thought crossed my mind before I could stop it. I knew exactly where the little girl had hidden her favorite blue ribbon, even though I had never seen that picture before. I should have walked away the moment I saw that photograph, but some memories have a way of reaching for you long before you remember reaching for them. I stood motionless in front of the faded image, unable to explain why my chest suddenly felt heavy. The little girl in the white sun hat could have been anyone, yet my mind whispered details that had no reason to exist. The blue ribbon is hidden beneath the third clay flower pot beside the greenhouse door. I blinked several times, trying to convince myself I had imagined the thought. Miss Carter, Damien's calm voice broke the silence behind me. I turned slowly and pointed toward the photograph. Who is she? Damien stepped beside me and studied the old picture for several seconds. The child, he asked quietly. I nodded. Nobody knows for certain, he answered. The photograph was taken more than 20 years ago at my grandmother's estate. She never labeled it, and after she passed away, no one could identify every child who had been there that afternoon. I looked back at the smiling little girl. I think I know where she hid something. Anthony looked up from his tablet. What do you mean? I hesitated, embarrassed by how impossible the words sounded. There is a blue ribbon. It is under the third clay flower pot near the greenhouse entrance. Neither Damien nor Anthony spoke. Their silence made me wonder whether I should apologize for saying something so irrational. Instead, Damien looked toward Anthony with the same composed expression he had worn throughout the evening. Call the estate. Anthony immediately stepped aside and placed a phone call. Less than 2 minutes later he returned, his professional composure shaken for the first time that night. Sir, he said carefully. The groundskeeper checked exactly where Miss Carter described. My heart pounded. And Anthony looked directly at me. There was an old blue ribbon beneath the third flower pot. It appears to have been there for many years. The gallery became completely silent. I felt the air leave my lungs. That is impossible, I whispered. Damien's gray eyes remained fixed on mine, not with suspicion, but with growing certainty. Perhaps not. I lowered my gaze, struggling to understand what was happening. I have never visited your family's estate. Not that you remember, he replied gently. Those words lingered between us. Before I could answer, my phone vibrated inside my cardigan pocket. I apologized quietly and stepped away before checking the screen. It was my father. Relief washed over me immediately. Dad, I answered with a smile. I was just leaving. His warm voice carried the familiar comfort I had known my entire life. Everything all right, Liv? I looked back toward Damien and Anthony before replying. It has been a very unusual evening. My father laughed softly. You always did attract interesting stories. I smiled despite everything. I will tell you all about it when I get home. There was a brief pause. Actually, he said, sounding thoughtful. Before you come by tomorrow, there is something your mother and I have wanted to give you for years. I frowned. What is it? An old wooden box that belonged to your birth family. We promised someone we would wait until the right time. My smile slowly disappeared. My birth family. Another pause followed. We always planned to tell you when the moment felt right. Perhaps that moment has finally arrived. I could barely speak. Why have you never mentioned it before? His voice remained gentle. Because we wanted you to grow up knowing that being loved mattered more than where you came from. Tears filled my eyes before I realized they were there. I understand. Come home tomorrow morning, he said softly. We will explain everything. The call ended, leaving me standing quietly beside the gallery window with the city lights reflecting across the rain-covered glass. When I turned around again, Damien had not moved. He simply watched me with quiet patience. I reached into my pocket and slowly wrapped my fingers around the white business card he had given me earlier. Mr. Moretti, I said carefully, I think tonight was never about a mistaken ring. He nodded once, almost as though he had already reached the same conclusion. No, he answered. I believe tonight was the beginning of someone making sure we finally found each other again. The drive back to Brooklyn should have cleared my mind, but every traffic light seemed to give my thoughts another excuse to linger. Rain had finally stopped, leaving the streets washed clean beneath the soft glow of midnight. By the time I unlocked the front door of Carter Florals, the familiar scent of fresh lilies and eucalyptus greeted me like an old friend. My orange tabby cat, Maple, stretched lazily across the checkout counter before walking toward me with the quiet confidence of someone convinced she owned the building. I laughed softly and scratched behind her ears. At least one thing in my life still makes perfect sense. I fed her dinner, turned off the storefront lights, and climbed the narrow staircase leading to the apartment above the shop. Normally, I could fall asleep within minutes after a long delivery day, but not that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the platinum ring resting on the velvet pillow, the faded greenhouse photograph, and Damien Moretti standing perfectly still as though he had recognized something long before I did. Around 1:30 in the morning, my phone vibrated on the bedside table. The screen displayed an unknown number. I almost ignored it, assuming it was another customer asking for a last-minute bouquet. Instead, I answered. Hello. Only silence greeted me. Then the call disconnected. Before I could set the phone down again, a message appeared. It contained no greeting, no signature, only one sentence. Do not ignore the olive tree. I frowned. Olive tree, not olive branch, not greenhouse. Olive tree. My heartbeat quickened. I replied before thinking. Who is this? The typing indicator never appeared. Instead, another message arrived almost immediately. Ask Damien about the promise beneath the roots. I stared at the words until the screen dimmed. Whoever had sent them knew details that only seemed to multiply with every passing hour. I quickly called the number back. An automated recording informed me the number was no longer in service. A cold shiver traveled down my spine despite the warm apartment. I walked downstairs into the quiet flower shop and switched on a single lamp near the work table. The familiar surroundings helped me think more clearly. I opened my delivery notebook and searched through the order details from that morning. White orchids, ivory roses, white ribbon, exactly as Anthony had shown me. There was still no mention of olive branches. Yet I remembered trimming them with my own hands before arranging them among the flowers. I remembered their fresh scent. I even remembered choosing the longest branch because it curved naturally around the velvet pillow. None of those memories felt uncertain. The small brass bell above the front door suddenly chimed. I froze. The shop had been locked for more than an hour. Maple lifted her head, but remained strangely calm. I cautiously walked toward the entrance. Standing outside the glass door was a courier wearing a plain gray jacket. He smiled politely when he saw me. Late delivery for Miss Olivia Carter. I unlocked the door just enough to accept the package. Who sent it? The courier checked his handheld device. There is no sender listed. Before I could ask another question, he thanked me and returned to an unmarked delivery van parked across the street. Within seconds, it disappeared around the corner. The package itself was surprisingly light. Brown paper wrapped a small rectangular box secured with ordinary twine. There was no return address, no postage marks, only my name written neatly across the front in blue ink. I carried it back to the work table and untied the string. Inside rested a small ceramic flower pot, holding a young olive sapling no taller than 12 inches. Around its slender trunk was tied a faded blue ribbon. My breath caught instantly. It matched the ribbon hidden beneath the third clay flower pot in the greenhouse photograph. Tucked beside the sapling lay a folded note written in elegant handwriting. With trembling fingers, I unfolded the paper and read a single sentence. When the tree remembers your name, the truth will finally remember yours. Morning arrived quietly, but nothing about my life felt ordinary anymore. The little olive sapling sat on the work table beneath the front window of Carter Florals, its faded blue ribbon catching the first rays of sunlight as though it had been waiting for dawn. Maples circled the flower pot once before settling beside it with surprising contentment. She had ignored every other plant in the shop for years, yet somehow this tiny tree had already become her favorite place to rest. I poured myself a cup of coffee that quickly grew cold because I could not stop staring at the handwritten note. When the tree remembers your name, the truth will finally remember yours. I read the sentence over and over, hoping repetition would make it less mysterious. Instead, it only became heavier. At exactly 8 o'clock, my phone vibrated. Damien's private number appeared on the screen. I answered almost immediately. Good morning. His calm voice carried the same quiet confidence as the night before. Anthony located additional records after you left the hotel. I looked at the olive sapling. I think someone found me first. I explained the anonymous messages, the late-night delivery, the blue ribbon, and the handwritten note without leaving out a single detail. Damien listened in complete silence. When I finished, he spoke only one sentence. Do not move the tree. I frowned. Why? Because my grandmother always believed that memories were tied to places before they were tied to people. Before I could ask what that meant, another familiar voice echoed through the shop. He is right. I turned toward the entrance. Standing just inside the open doorway was an elderly woman with silver hair tucked beneath a pale blue scarf. She carried a weathered canvas gardening bag over one shoulder and smiled with the quiet warmth of someone greeting an old friend instead of a stranger. I immediately recognized the name from Anthony's payment records before she even introduced herself. Eleanor Brooks. She nodded gently. You remembered the name. Damien remained on the phone, listening carefully as I described the unexpected visitor. Eleanor stepped closer to the olive sapling and lightly touched one of its leaves. It survived, she whispered with visible relief. I was afraid it might not. I looked between the tiny tree and the elderly woman. You sent this? No, she answered honestly. I only knew someone eventually would. Her answer made even less sense than everything that had happened before. She slowly removed a pair of worn gardening gloves and folded them neatly inside her bag. Her hands carried the gentle marks of a lifetime spent tending living things. Your mother loved olive trees, she said softly. My heart stopped. My adoptive mother? Eleanor smiled kindly. No, the woman who gave you life. Tears gathered before I could stop them. She continued before I found the words to respond. She believed every child deserved roots strong enough to survive any storm, even if those roots had to grow somewhere else for a while. I leaned against the work table, overwhelmed by emotions that arrived faster than I could understand them. Damien quietly spoke through the phone again. Olivia, may I come to the shop? I looked toward Eleanor. She gave a small approving nod. Yes, I answered. Please. Less than 30 minutes later, a black sedan stopped outside Carter Florals. Damien stepped inside, wearing another perfectly tailored black suit. The intricate black tattoos climbing above his collar remained visible against his fair skin, just as they always were. Anthony followed, carrying a slim leather portfolio. Neither man seemed interested in the flowers surrounding them. Their attention settled immediately on the olive sapling. Eleanor smiled warmly when she saw Damien. "You have your grandmother's eyes," she said. Damien bowed his head respectfully. "And you still keep her promises." Eleanor reached into her gardening bag and carefully removed a small weathered wooden key tied with another faded blue ribbon. She placed it beside the olive tree before looking directly at me. "This key opens a wooden box your parents have protected for more than 20 years. My pulse quickened. "The box my father mentioned." She nodded. "Inside is not your inheritance." She paused long enough for every word to settle into the quiet flower shop. "Inside is your first memory." The smallest keys sometimes open the largest chapters of a life. I could not take my eyes off the weathered wooden key resting beside the tiny olive sapling. It looked ordinary, worn smooth by time, yet everyone standing inside my flower shop treated it with quiet respect. Eleanor folded her hands together and stepped back as though she had completed the task she had carried for decades. Damien remained silent, giving me space instead of answers. It was becoming something I admired about him. Every time the truth moved closer, he never tried to control it. He simply waited for me to reach it on my own. I carefully picked up the key. The faded blue ribbon tied around it brushed against my fingertips, and for one brief second a distant memory flickered through my mind. Tiny hands, warm sunlight, the scent of damp soil after spring rain, someone laughing while lifting me high enough to hang a ribbon on the branch of a young olive tree. The image vanished before I could hold on to it. I looked at Eleanor. "Will the box really explain everything?" She smiled with gentle understanding. "Not everything. Some truths are meant to be remembered, not explained." Damien glanced toward Anthony, who quietly closed the leather portfolio he had brought with him. "Your parents are expecting you," Anthony said softly. "We spoke with them while we were driving here. They asked if you would come this morning." I nodded slowly. Then I should not keep them waiting. Before leaving, I carefully watered the tiny olive sapling and placed it near the brightest window in the shop. Maple jumped onto the counter and curled herself beside the flower pot, as if standing guard. Eleanor smiled warmly. Animals often recognize peace before people do. The drive across Brooklyn felt strangely calm. Sunlight reflected from storefront windows while people hurried through their ordinary Saturday routines carrying grocery bags, bicycles, and fresh coffee. I wondered how many lives around me held hidden stories waiting for the right moment to surface. When we reached my parents' house, my father was already standing on the front porch. The moment he saw me, he smiled with the same kindness that had carried me through every stage of my life. My mother stepped outside only seconds later and wrapped me in a long embrace before saying a single word. "You know," she whispered gently. I nodded against her shoulder. "I know there is more to my story." She held my hands as we walked inside together. Damien and Anthony remained respectfully outside, giving us privacy without being asked. Eleanor quietly stayed in the garden, admiring the blooming roses my mother had planted years earlier. My father led me into the living room where a small oak chest rested on the coffee table. Time had softened the wood into a rich golden brown. My breath caught immediately. The carved olive branch on the lid matched the design Eleanor had described. Without speaking, my father reached into his pocket. "You already have the key," he said softly. My hands trembled as I inserted it into the tiny brass lock. The mechanism clicked with surprising ease, as though it had been waiting only for me. Inside rested a folded baby blanket embroidered with delicate olive leaves, a tiny silver bracelet, several old photographs, and a sealed envelope with my name written across the front in elegant handwriting. Beneath them lay a small music box decorated with white orchids. The moment I lifted its lid, a gentle melody filled the quiet room. My eyes closed instinctively. Suddenly, another memory returned, stronger than before. I was sitting beneath a glass roof surrounded by blooming flowers while a little boy with bright gray eyes laughed as I proudly showed him a bracelet woven from green and white thread. "Do not lose it," I had told him. "If you keep it, we will always find each other again." My eyes opened as tears rolled quietly down my face. My mother gently squeezed my shoulder. "What did you remember?" I looked toward the front window where Damien stood waiting outside beneath the morning sunlight, patient as ever. A peaceful smile slowly appeared through my tears. "I did not meet him for the first time at that hotel," I whispered. "I was simply remembering someone my heart had never truly forgotten." Some people spend their entire lives searching for destiny, only to discover that destiny had been patiently waiting for them to remember who they had always been. I stood beside the living room window holding the little green and white bracelet in one hand, while the morning sunlight painted soft golden patterns across the polished wooden floor. The memories no longer arrived as scattered fragments. They flowed gently, one after another, like pages of a forgotten story, finally returning home. I remembered the greenhouse filled with white orchids. I remembered the young olive tree growing near the glass wall. Most of all, I remembered a quiet boy with thoughtful gray eyes who preferred watering flowers instead of chasing the other children through the garden. That boy had been Damien. My father rested a comforting hand on my shoulder. "We never wanted you to lose your past," he said softly. "We only wanted you to have the freedom to build your own future." I turned toward both of my parents, my heart overflowing with gratitude instead of confusion. "You gave me that future," I answered. "Everything good in my life began because you chose to love me." My mother smiled through tears and embraced me once more. "Love has never been about blood," she whispered. "It has always been about showing up every single day." A few minutes later, I walked outside carrying the small wooden box, the music box, and the faded bracelet. Damien was waiting beside the black sedan exactly where I had left him. He had not tried to enter the house. He had not interrupted a single family moment. His tailored black suit looked as precise as ever, and the intricate tattoos rising above the collar of his white shirt remained visible against his fair skin. But for the first time I noticed something stronger than the image everyone associated with him. Patience. Quiet respect. He looked at the bracelet in my hand before meeting my eyes. "You remembered," he said gently. I nodded. I remembered enough. I stepped closer until only a few feet separated us. "You kept your promise." A faint smile appeared across his face. I almost lost it once. He reached into his jacket pocket and carefully removed a small fabric pouch. Inside rested another bracelet woven from green and white thread. Time had faded its colors, but every knot remained intact. I laughed softly through my tears. "You actually kept it. You told me that if I did, we would always find each other again." Neither of us spoke for several quiet moments. Birds sang from nearby maple trees while a light breeze carried the scent of blooming roses across my parents' front yard. It was not the dramatic ending people might have expected. There were no grand speeches, no applause, no declarations meant for crowds. Only two people finally understanding a promise made long before they were old enough to appreciate its meaning. Damien reached into another pocket and removed the platinum family ring. This time he did not lift my hand. He did not move closer. Instead, he placed the ring gently inside the wooden box beside the music box and the bracelets before closing the lid. "The choice is yours," he said quietly. "It always should have been." I looked at the closed box, then back at the little flower shop keys resting in my hand. My life in Brooklyn was real. My family was real. My dreams were real. Nothing about discovering my past changed the value of the life I had already built. I smiled warmly. "Tomorrow morning, I still have 3 wedding bouquets to finish." Damien chuckled softly. Then I should not keep the florist from her work. We began walking together toward the sidewalk, not because either of us had decided what the future would look like, but because neither of us needed to rush anymore. Some journeys begin with certainty. Ours began with trust. As we reached the gate, I slipped the little green and white bracelet into Damien's hand. "Keep it a little longer," I said. "Why?" I smiled toward the bright morning sky before answering. "Because now I know exactly where to find you." He closed his fingers gently around the bracelet and looked at me with quiet gratitude instead of triumph. The mistaken ring that had astonished an entire ballroom had never been the real beginning of our story. It was only the moment the world finally noticed 2 lives that destiny had quietly connected years before. In the end, the greatest lesson was never about power, wealth, or family legacy. It was that the strongest hearts do not ask to be owned. They ask to be understood. And sometimes the most extraordinary love begins with the courage to place a ring back into its box until both hands are truly ready to reach for each other.